Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the 50th class in our series on the Abrahamic religions, though we're now focused pretty tightly for the foreseeable future on the Baha'i teachings and the Baha'i faith. We will not have a class a week from tonight, which would be the night before Thanksgiving. And so far as what our schedule will be after that, I will keep you informed. But tonight we will finish the discussion of the Qá'im, the Book of Certitude. And then next we will discuss the historical context in which the tablet of the Holy Mariner was revealed. Then after that, we will discuss the tablet of the Holy Mariner. And after that, we'll discuss the Rizvan declaration of Bahá'u'lláh and so on. So we'll kind of have a mixture of history and historical context with study of the text and the revealed writings of Baha'u'lláh as we go along. So I think we will have a very good time of it insofar as seeing what leads up to what, insofar as his declaring himself to his close friends and followers, and then later, and when he gets to Adrianople, declaring himself to the world at large. So tonight, let me start by correcting an inference you might have drawn from last week's class, and that has to do with scholarship. So many passages we've read have quoted Baha'u'lláh as decrying the hard-headedness and lack of receptivity of the divines and scholars. And that's what divines are. They are religious scholars. And yet, I want to be sure that you understand that the Baha'i faith and the writings of the Baha'i faith strongly recommend scholarship itself. So it's not scholarship that's being condemned. It was the idea of creating a class of people who had both political and divine authority and therefore thought they had the right to interpret authoritatively the text. And of course, in the Baha'i teachings, most of you may be aware that there is no group of scholars that have any authority or that have any right to give a more accurate interpretation of the text than you do, except for the central figures of the faith, Baha'u'lláh, Abdul-Baha, and Shoghi Effendi, and of the House of Justice, which doesn't interpret the text, but elucidates the text. A subtle difference, but a difference all the same. So I just wanted to say one thing, that what then is the value of scholarship? Because we have had in the past, both within and without the faith, those who would deem themselves to have some authoritative interpretation of, for example, the administrative order or something, and were accepted as such by some. And yet the House of Justice came out with two different collections of passages about scholarship. And I've mentioned them to you before, and I'll mention them again. I don't want to get into them right now, but suffice to say, they responded to this question in great detail. But just off the top of my head, I thought you might find it valuable to see that from our own perspective and what we've experienced during the last year of this course, is that things such as reference works, glossaries, chronologies, histories, biographies, collections of stories such as Memorials of the Faithful or vignettes from the life of Abdul-Baha, as well as personal studies of the text, while not authoritative, are extremely helpful, and we really can't make nearly as rapid progress without these wonderful resources. And of course, the online resources are the most readily available to us if we don't have the books, and many of the important books are either out of print or hard to get now. A second category of scholarship that's valuable are articles, such as those that analyze specific subjects in the faith, such as, say, the equality of men and women, and so forth, and articles that have imaginative approaches to the history and the authoritative text, including personal interpretations and studies of specific themes. So while it's no one has the right to claim authority in interpreting the text, we're all encouraged to interpret them for ourselves. In fact, I think that's become very clear in the first proof we analyzed last time of the appearance of a manifestation. And of course, Baha'u'lláh is particularly defending the appearance of the Bab as fulfilling the appearance of the long-awaited Qá'im. And so the personal study interpretation is extremely important. And of course, we are supposed to, even if we have resources that we trust, understand it on our own. As I've said repeatedly, if we're simply repeating what someone else has taught us or their opinion, such as the opinions I'm giving you in this course, if you simply accept it point blank without investigating it for yourself, you're not really doing the job that you are supposed to be doing, namely to understand it in your own terms, in your own methodology. Conferences is another source, are another source of a creative scholarship, where you have collaborative discourse on subjects, which creates a cross-pollination across different fields. Books are starting to come out with collections of essays of different approaches to subjects, which can include such variety of subjects as psychology, sociology, literary analysis, cosmology, physics, theology, philosophy, and so on. The faith can be approached from so many different angles, and it affects and is affected by all of them. Well, let's get to finishing the Book of Certitude tonight. These are all the sections in my outline, and again, I emphasize this is only my outline; it's not authoritative. But we've gone through part 1 with all the 8 sections, and we've gone through part 2, except for the last 5 sections, 4 of which are 3, the 8, 9, and 10 are the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th proofs of the Qá'im. Then the 11th one is Baha'u'lláh cautioning the Bábís, who of course are his primary audience, that they're going to be tested the same way that the followers of the Bab were tested by the Muslims, that they're going to be tested to recognize him whom God will make manifest, the one that the Bab has prophesied. And then the last concluding section, which is quite brief, is simply some closing observations about the necessity of understanding how to read the scripture. Again, the thing he starts off with. So as we review this whole work, we can see it as almost a textbook on the Baha'i teachings, on how to read scripture, and on the principles of proof regarding the manifestations, how we test our own beliefs, and how we test their assertions that they are who they claim to be. So we left off last week with section 5, that the first proof, or this is actually 4 and 5, are the proof of the word of God being the foremost proof of the manifestation, the fact that they convey to us without revision, without editing of any sort, spontaneously, the revealed text, which is something that both Muhammad and the Bab and Baha'u'lláh challenge those who question their authority, challenge them to do. If you can, in other words, if you doubt who I am, let you produce a surah like it, or a document in the same fashion, of the same quality. And of course, this was a proof that Subi Azel, or the half-brother of Baha'u'lláh, who became the inveterate enemy of Baha'u'lláh, this is what he was challenged to do and what he was unable to do. So we go to section 6, which is the second proof. And this is the proof that we mentioned before when we were first studying the Baha'i faith. And that is the most profound proof in one sense of the sincerity and credibility of the Bab, was that those who followed him were of extraordinary character and eagerly sacrificed their lives on behalf of the faith. Unlike previous revelations where the first followers are the simple or the unlearned, some of the followers, as Baha'u'lláh goes on to say in this section, were the most learned in all and recognized as such in all of Persia. The third proof, 7, is the constancy of the manifestation in revealing the text, even though his life is threatened and he is persecuted and prosecuted by the government for continuing to proclaim his station and revealing the text.
Dr. Hatcher, can I interrupt you just for a second? Would you mind sharing your screen here?
Absolutely. I mean, absolutely not. I would not mind. I would not mind at all. So we come to the third proof, as I said, the constancy of the Bab in proclaiming the faith. And then the fourth proof was section 10, are the traditions of the bygone age. This is something Baha'u'lláh says is not a particularly great proof, and he doesn't like them very much, but for the sake of those who like them, he will show that the coming of the Qá'im in the person of the Bab is fulfilling those requisites in the prophecies and hadiths of Islam primarily, though in other religions as well. And then 11, as I said, the warning of Baha'u'lláh to the Bábís, prophesying the future, and finally, the particularly emphasizing the two kinds of language that the prophets use. One is literal and the other figurative, and we have to be sure we understand which is which. We'll do that when we get to the tablet of the Holy Mariner, which is entirely figurative. It's actually an allegory. So we begin with the second proof in some detail. And again, as I said last week, rather than reading the whole outline for you, which is what these slides are taken from, you have the outline, you have access to it. You should print it out if you can. It's a PDF file, and it's at the attached to each of the recordings on the YouTube channel or on my website. Print out the outline. So you'll have all these slides as slides, and you'll have them as part of the outline. So I'm only going to read some of the highlighted passages that are particularly important. They're all important, but that are particularly noteworthy insofar as concluding this amazing work is concerned. So certain souls arise to follow them. They are, as Baha'u'lláh said, obscured and detached from all worldly entanglements. They seek illumination and divine guidance from the prophet, and they long to attain his presence. But another proof, and this can be seen as another proof unto itself. So if you're outlining the book for yourself, you might say, well, here's another proof, is that the very people you think would accept them arise against them without really any cause. Of course, we see this happening with Christ, as the Jewish divines arise against him and condemn him to death. We see it with Muhammad, as the leaders of both the pagan religions and the Jews and the Christians arise against him. And the reasons they arise, that they see him only as a man like other men. They do no miracles, which they, that would impress them. They say that the rich and the powerful don't follow them, only the lowly follow them. So why should we believe them, and so on. part of the reason that this second proof is important is that the manifestation persists in spite of this rejection. And then, as I say, looking at it from another direction, you can say, and this is also a proof, at least it has been, that the leaders of the past religion reject them. Now, our understanding is, or at least my understanding is, that that will not happen with the advent of the next manifestation. And yet Baha'u'lláh does say that he fears for what he will encounter. It doesn't necessarily mean from the Baha'i administrative order or so on, but we don't know. We only know that the manifestations act sacrificially and endure many tests. So he says the difference, however, in this, and I've just mentioned this already, is that some of the people who arose to follow the Bab weren't the lowly, the humble. There were people like Wahid, who was sent by the Shah Muhammad to investigate, actually to put down and to disprove the Bab. But Wahid had to write back and say, I'm sorry, I've become a follower, even though he was understood not just by the court, but by the learned people of Persia in general to be the most learned Islamic scholar in the land, and he became a follower. So what he's saying here, another aspect of this proof, insofar as the Bab is concerned, is that some of the most learned and courageous students in the land were the first followers. Among them, and he begins to list and discuss them very briefly, Mullah Hussein, Wahid, and the 400 who were the ones who fought, and most of them died or were imprisoned afterward at Fort Tabarsi. And then he says, these holy souls are the proof. They were slaughtered for their beliefs. They renounced their material possessions. Their lives witnessed against those who betrayed their faith, who bartered away immortality for that which perisheth. So which testimony is more worthy? The testimony of those whose deeds conform with their words are those faithless souls who are selfish, worldly, petty-minded, and oblivious to the divine decree. And then on page 223, he lists some 11 particular souls, some of whom are explained in notes and so on in the back of the concordance, which is in the back of the work. We're not going to go through who these were, but they're just some of the particularly stalwart souls who were the first followers of the Bab. So he compares these martyrs to the martyrdom of Imam Hussein, who is regarded by the Moslems as the greatest martyr of the Islamic faith. And indeed, this is where Baha'u'lláh takes his name, is from Hussein, Mirza Hussein Ali. So it combines the Hussein and then the first Imam Ali. These holy lights, the Bábís, have endured such affliction for 18 years, and that would be beginning with the declaration of the Bab in 1844, all the way up to the present tense, which is this is 1862, when this book was revealed. And as we mentioned before, the original manuscript of this was copied down by Abdu'l-Bahá, and it was that same manuscript is now in the archives at the World Center, and that this was one of the first books that was printed by Baha'u'lláh, primarily, I believe, in India. So their devotion and their sacrifice is a sufficient testimony and an irrefutable proof to people everywhere who ponder in their hearts the mysteries of divine revelation. And he refers to the Quran, where Muhammad says that giving one's life is truly a divine touchstone. If you are men of truth, wish for death. And of course, it doesn't mean that you mindlessly sacrifice yourself. In fact, the Baha'i laws say one should not seek out martyrdom, that if it comes upon you, you do not deny your faith. So unlike Islam, where one can dissimulate, that is the law of taqiyya, which means in a moment of threat or difficulty, you can deny your faith and say you're not a Muslim. Well, Baha'u'lláh abolishes that law, and so that one should follow the law of the land wherever you may abide. But if you live in Iran, present-day Persia, and you are asked if you're a Baha'i, and you know that doing so will keep you from being able to go to the university or maintain your shop or business, you do not deny it. This is not something you can do, which ultimately pays dividends. So these martyrs who have sacrificed all are of unquestionable sincerity, and again, which makes more sense to accept the testimony of these exalted beings or the denunciation of those who have ulterior motives, and those are listed below. Well, obviously, the answer is apparent. This is the explanation of what motivates those who do not recognize the manifestation. They are attracted by leadership, by the vanities of this world. And so this is why I had that little brief discourse on scholarship up front. And that will be on the slides. So if you didn't take down what I said, it will be on the slides, even though I wasn't sharing my screen at the time. To distinguish between true scholarship that is of value and that is absolutely necessary, and those religious leaders who are unable to recognize the revealer of truth. So it's strange that none of those heroes whom we have mentioned as being among the divines and learned had rank or leadership. Now, what he's talking about is it doesn't mean they weren't recognized, as I say, as Vahid was. It means they didn't have a government position or were considered among the religious hierarchy. So God only, this echoes, doesn't it, the passage from the New Testament, many are called, but few are chosen. God endows only a select few with this capacity. The Bab has revealed an epistle unto the divines of every city, describing the character of their rejection of the revelation. His purpose in discussing their opposition was to prepare the Bábís, and this is important because this is already pointing towards the conclusion and climax of all of what Baha'u'lláh has said throughout this entire book, and that is, get ready because him whom God will make manifest, according to the Bab himself, will appear within this year. Of course, he did. And so it's in 1863 that Baha'u'lláh reveals himself at the Rizvan commemoration or declaration. And we'll discuss that in the setting for that, how that comes about in our next class. So he was preparing the Bábís, the Bab was, for the day of the latter resurrection. Now, the resurrection, in other words, on one hand, you don't separate the revelation of the Bab from the revelation of Baha'u'lláh. They're twin manifestations. The beginning of the Baha'i faith is said to begin in 1844. So it's really one revelation, and it really is the day of days, this whole period. And yet you divide these two parts of that into what is called the resurrection and then the latter resurrection. This term is used in this work and about one or two other places, but it's referring to the fact that you first break the water, if you will, with the first trumpet blast of the declaration of the Bab, and then you have the declaration of Bahá'u'lláh, which is the latter resurrection. These are described both in the Quran and in some hadiths. In the hadith, it is said that the first trumpet blast will dumbfound the masses. They will be totally confused and there will be upheaval, which is, of course, precisely what happened throughout Persia. And it continued. And the second trumpet blast will bring unity, will bring about the true resurrection of men. And of course, we're talking about a spiritual resurrection. All right. The third proof. So we go to section 9. The constancy of the Bab in proclaiming the faith of God. This is something we discussed in some detail in our class on the declaration of the Bab. And the fact that he says in his own revelation, in his own works, that he knows he will be persecuted. He even knows he will be martyred. And he even says it's unavoidable. But he is happy with that. He is content with the will of God and knows that that is a necessary step in the process of reforming the world. So, though young, and though what he revealed was contrary to the desires of the people, he was steadfast. And we've gone over this one, as I said before, but he was afraid of no one. He cared not of the consequences. So how can the people account for such constancy? What did he have to gain? Now, this is a very important question when you're examining the life of any of the manifestations, particularly someone who claims to be a manifestation and you're not sure they are. So if you're not a Baha'i and Baha'u'lláh is claiming to be the successor to Christ, for example, and you're a Christian, how do you test that? Well, one question to ask is, what did he have to gain by claiming this? Absolutely nothing but persecution. And what was his response? Of course, you've got what were the proofs. The proofs are his ability to reveal all of these myriad texts, more than all the other previous religious scripture combined, and did so while imprisoned. So he was imprisoned from almost the day he declared himself until his execution. But even as I said last time, the Baha'i faith has spread without the influence of any other source of power, any moneyed interest, and so on. So how did it come about? Well, the only explanation is that it must be true if you look at it carefully and study it. So how can the people account for such constancy? No ordinary human being could conceive of such a revelation. So that's one, the words. Do they accuse him of folly? Do they think he did this to acquire power or wealth? If so, then why does he prophesy his own martyrdom? In other words, if he's looking to gain something by this, then, and he knows the only thing he will gain is to be killed for it, that's not really to his benefit. In the Qá'im al-Asma, the first work he revealed, he yearns for it. In his interpretation of the letter Ha, letter H, he says that, but for his awareness of the necessity of his martyrdom, the inevitable mystery of the revelation of Baha'u'lláh, the people would be powerless to take anything from him. And that's what Ha stands for, is the revelation of Baha'u'lláh. Or at least that's one of the interpretations. These utterances reflect complete detachment from self and yearning for God's good pleasure, not detachment from yearning for God's, but detachment for self and yearning for God's good pleasure. Because the persecutors in their ingratitude ignore these obvious signs of the divine presence, they will be severely chastised in the world to come. Now, we know from the Baha'i writings that the soul of everyone is infinite. And we also know from the Baha'i writings that we sort of begin where we leave off in this life, spiritually and intellectually. So what does this mean? How will they be chastised? Well, obviously not physically, but as I say in some other works I have written, that the torture of mental or emotional agony, despair, depression, so on, are quite as painful as any physical torment. So the fact that it's not physical doesn't mean that it's not severe. We're going to get into this some more when he talks about the destiny of, in other works we will look at, the destiny of what will befall those who have tried to kill him and those who have, when Bahá'u'lláh talks about the future of, say in the Kitab-i-Aqdas, he talks about, he talks to Mirza Yahya, his half-brother, and says, you know, if you will ask for forgiveness, God will forgive you. But if you don't, he can well do without you. In other words, it's only to your benefit. Steadfastness in the faith is thus a sure testimony of the truth. Muhammad alluded to the importance of this constancy regarding his own life, and behold how the life of the Bab demonstrated this quality. The more severe the persecution, the more his fervor increased. Ultimately, he surrendered his life itself. And then I love this phrase, unaided and alone, because he was alone. Remember in Maku, he was, there was a guard and a dog, I think it said, and there was no light or anything, and it was imprisoned in this mountain fortress. And that's where he revealed the Bayan, with the main work of the Bábí faith. His constancy was such that unaided and alone, he manifested spiritual power throughout the world. As soon as he declared himself in Shiraz in 1844, the signs of power emanating from that essence of essences were manifest in every land. These holy souls, and he's talking about those who arose to assist him. Now remember, we're still within the category of the proof of those, of the constancy of the Bab. And his constancy had a transmuting influence on those who were with him. And so it sort of echoes back to the second proof of the holy souls who arise to serve the cause until his last breath. And of course, his last breath, if you'll recall, was his calling out to the crowd and warning them that someday they would remember this and regret it, but it would be too late. Who in this world could so transform people that they would gladly endure such agony? And the agony, of course, of the imprisonment, of the persecution, which goes on today. This violent commotion, this execration by the people of the earth, and this is specifically what I've denoted here at the last part of this, could be, if you were outlining it for yourself, a fourth proof. And that is this violent commotion, this execration by the people of the earth of these heroes of resignation and detachment. And we're talking about all the manifestations, but also these first followers, is the mightiest proof and surest testimony of the truth of these heroes profess. So the fact that if you look at the life of Moses or Christ or Muhammad and so on, the fact that they persist in spite of persecution is a proof but the fact of the ones, of the nature of the ones who persecute them could be considered a proof unto itself. And so here we get to the fourth and final proof, or fifth, if you want to count the one I just mentioned as a separate proof. And he says, even though we did not intend to resort to the traditions of a bygone age as part of the testimonial proof of our argument, and notice the word argument here is where he himself gives you the generic category of this literary work. It is an argument. It is a proof. It is, as I said last time, it could be likened into a court case where he's proving the innocence of the Bab, but also the station of the Bab. And so he will cite a few of these. And he says, we didn't want to do this because, and he gives the reasons that everything we've done already is sufficient. So that's basically what this is saying. However, we will do it. So in other words, I'm giving you enough proof already, so this should not be necessary. But he will do it to provide constancy for those who need it, the wavering souls, or tranquility to the troubled mind. It's sort of the same thing, if you will, with something like the book that Bill Sears wrote many decades ago, but it's still quite viable. And on the advent of Christ, the work is very much dealing with the prophecies and how they're fulfilled in the same way that the Abdul Baha in the first part of the Some Answered Questions, where the section on some Christian subjects, where he gives very explicit interpretation of some of the numerical prophecies about the time when Christ would appear and so on. So it's the same thing here. They're kind of mathematical, or kind of what you say, like solving a puzzle that has no, in other words, this doesn't require spirituality from you. It requires only that you put 2 and 2 together, or you come up with the year 1844 or so on, which is not really such a spiritual proof, is it? Whereas these other proofs have been. These are more mechanical or mechanistic in nature. One tradition states that when the standard of truth is made manifest, the people of both East and West will curse it. And he goes on to show again how the Bab was execrated and how he was persecuted. If the prophet changes something from the past, they reject that and say, no, that couldn't be. In the same way that when Christ breaks the law of the Sabbath, this is what he's persecuted for, or the healing of the sick on the Sabbath and so on. However, the divine call summons mankind to renounce these customs and observances. And the people ignore the well-founded traditions. The signs of truth are as obvious as the midday sun. And I'm going to go on. The people still await one who will uphold the Islamic law. The Jews likewise wait for the Messiah. The Christians wait for the second coming. People reject the new law, even though many traditions indicate that the new prophet will bring this change. So this is a real challenge. And of course, the Bayan is of the Book of Laws for the Babi faith, and it's very elaborate, very intricate laws, and no doubt was a great challenge to the Bábís who received those laws. The prayer of Nubi states that the Mahdi will transform the faith. The Imam Ali states, peace be upon the truth made new. The sixth Imam, which is Sadiq, said the Mahdi will demolish whatever hath been before him. So the people contend the law must not be altered, though the object of every revelation is to bring about a new law, a transformation, both outwardly and inwardly. And of course, we've said this before when we were talking about Christ, with the new wine must needs have a new wine skin to contain it. In other words, you need the new spiritual teaching, but you need a social and administrative structure to administer that new spirituality to the people in some organic but organized way. So if change in the character of mankind does occur, then of what value does not occur, then of what value is the advent of the manifestation? In the collection of Shia traditions called the Avalim, confirms that a youth from the house of Muhammad, and that's misspelled, will reveal a new book and promulgate a new law. It also observed that his enemies will be the divines, and the Imam Sadiq, that's the sixth Imam, confirmed this and said the revelation would be stern unto the Arabs. In other words, it would test them. Some people reject the new law, even though many traditions indicate the new prophet will bring this change. So let's see if there's anything here particularly important. The peace be upon the truth made new. The sixth Iman, the Midi will demolish whatever. This is all repeating the same idea, the change and how the change will test the people. The people contend the law must not be altered, though the object of every revelation is to bring about transformation. And well, you know, we've already gone over this. I don't know why this is repeating, so I'm sorry here. Let me go here. All right, this gets to the traditions about the ones, if you remember, that the Bab said to, recited to, or responded to Mullah Hussein during the evening of his declaration. He said, "What are you looking for?" And he was someone from the house of Muhammad who will have immaculate character and so on. And he gave him the various, and he says, aren't these criteria manifest in me? Okay. So each letter of this tradition has been fulfilled, yet no one has wondered how it could be fulfilled if the Qá'im were to bring only the laws that have already been fulfilled. Why would strife then arise? In other words, if he's simply going to reinforce previous law, who would mind, who would care? So it makes no sense that he would not. He foretold, and this is interesting, he foretold that 80 men, and this is Imam Abu Abdullah, he foretold that 80 men, all worthy to be called caliphs, would be slain near Tehran by Persians. As you know, this occurred, the slaughter of the Bábís at Tabarsi. The rejection of this and other obviously fulfilled traditions is due to the faithlessness of the divines and doctors of the age, even as Sadiq foretold. He also foretold that the same mischief would return to them. All right, then we go to the next to last section, section 11, that the same tests, as I mentioned, that have befallen the Muslims in recognizing the Bab will test the Bábís to recognize Bahá'u'lláh. And in this, he specifically, Bahá'u'lláh does, refer to himself, not directly, but Mustagath, he who is invoked, which is Bahá'u'lláh. He says, when he appears, we entreat the learned men of the Bayan not to repeat these same errors of rejection when Mustagath, who is Bahá'u'lláh, appears in the time of the latter resurrection, which of course, as I said, occurs within the next year. Be careful not to rely solely on your intellect. Do not rely solely on comprehension of traditional learning. Do not contend with the prophet. He says, but in spite of this, we know that you're going to do it. In spite of these admonitions, we foresee the suffering of the Blessed Beauty. And he even alludes to Sayyid Muhammad of Isfahan, who was the one who instigated in Mirza Yahya or Subi Azal the desire or the idea of taking over the position of Baha'u'llah or contending with Baha'u'llah. So we foresee people in every city arising to suppress us. The companions of the Blessed Beauty will be persecuted. Some companions will flee from the oppressor and seek refuge in the wilderness. And that's a particular allusion to Subi Azel, who did precisely that, and did it as soon as the Rizvan declaration was done. And we'll discuss that. Whereas some companions will sacrifice their lives in his path. We foresee one who is reputed for devoutness and piety, who will arise to assault, resist, and oppose the prophet. Again, probably Mirza Yahya. We would fain hope it would be otherwise, but we foreknow what will occur. Would that the people of the Bayan would heed this warning and all we have said, and in effect not repeat the rejection perpetrated again by themselves. Now, it's important here that he says we foreknow, because the manifestations do foreknow. And this term, the people of the Bayan, will, as after he reaches Adrianople, will become an appellation of denigration, of disparagement, because they will be following the Bayan when they should be following Baha'u'lláh. We'll get to that. Would that they would soar in the realm of spirit. Would that they could discern the truth. Would that they could recognize falsehood. However, jealousy abounds, and such malice, envy, and hate will occur that have never occurred before, nor will ever occur in the future. And so what he's talking about here is something that has to do with what we will study in the Tablet of the Holy Mariner. Okay, I'm going to skip through this and go right to the end. One thing important here, he says, when we saw what was going to happen when we came to Baghdad, therefore we went to the wilderness, talking about went to the mountains of Suleymaniye. And as we mentioned when we studied that, our sole purpose in this was to avoid becoming the subject of discord to our companions. And if you remember, the more he tried to help, the more Mirza Yahya said, look, he's trying to take my place. I'm really the one. So he talks about how he went to the mountains and so on. And so he concludes the argument with these observations. There is no power nor strength but in God alone. The people in general ignore these proofs. And of course, this has been an argument with proofs. The consummate verses, remember, that's the first proof. The unmistakable allusions in those verses, the constancy of the prophet, the evident traditions, and of course, the unmistakable allusions, with the second proof could be the allusions and those who arise in the service of the manifestation. Instead, the people cling to literal interpretations of certain traditions. And so again, the literalism versus the spiritual understanding of the scriptures is the concluding point he makes. He says that we speak, clearly the prophets speak, a twofold language whose purpose is to test and to teach. The outward language is not figurative or elusive, it's literal. That would be like the language of the laws and so on. This language is like a guiding lamp for the seeker. These are the unveiled traditions and evident verses, not the abstruse or figurative ones. The other language is veiled and concealed to weed out the malevolent and to test the faithful. This is the figurative and symbolic language. It is the touchstone of God, meaning touchstone, remember, test metal to see it if it's gold or if it's base metal. No one understands this concept except those whose hearts are assured, whose souls have found favor with God, and whose minds are detached from all else but him. In this language, the literal meanings is not what is intended. And then we'll conclude with this famous quote or tradition. Every knowledge hath 70 meanings, of which one only is known amongst the people. And when the Qá'im shall arise, he shall reveal unto men all that which remaineth. We speak one word, and by it we intend 70 1 and 70 meanings. I said 72 last time, it's 71. Each one of these we can explain. We mentioned this distinction between the two sorts of language, that people may not be disturbed by those traditions and utterances that do not seem to have been literally fulfilled. And so that's, you can read the rest of this on your own. That's all I want to do with the slides tonight. And so we come to the conclusion of our formal presentation of, or quasi-formal presentation of the Kitab-i-Iqan, but I hope for you it is just the beginning of your own study, because until you study it on your own, it's not really yours.